Brett Ross was 38 years old, teaching boxing in a leaking gym on Cleveland's east side while driving a 12-year-old Ford F-150 with rust around the doors. Most people thought he was a washed-up fighter, living off his wife's real estate money. Even Vanessa Ross believed that. What nobody knew was that 2 hours earlier, Brett had won a championship in Las Vegas, and the entire $2.4 million prize had already been transferred out of his name. The locker room still smelled like blood, sweat, and antiseptic when Vanessa walked in wearing a white designer coat, dropped the divorce papers onto the steel table beside his championship belt, and said, "We're done." Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. And if you enjoy slow burn betrayal stories with real consequences, hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. Most people in Cleveland had forgotten Brett Ross long before he ever stepped back into a cage. 10 years earlier, his name had floated through Midwest MMA circles like a quiet warning. Strong hands, heavy counterpuncher, impossible to pressure once he settled into rhythm. At 28, he had been one win away from signing a developmental UFC contract in Chicago. Then his knee exploded during a regional title fight in Detroit. Not torn, not strained, exploded. The doctors at Metro Health Medical Center used words fighters hated hearing. Structural damage, long recovery, reduced mobility, permanent instability. Within 18 months, the phone calls stopped. Promoters moved on fast. Fans moved on faster. Cleveland forgot him. The way cold cities forgot most men who almost became something. Now at 38, Brett spent most mornings unlocking South Harbor Fight Club before sunrise, while lake effect snow drifted across the empty parking lot outside. The gym sat between a pawn shop and an abandoned tire warehouse on East 55th Street. The sign above the entrance had lost 3 letters years ago. Water stains spread across the ceiling tiles. Half the lockers no longer closed properly. Brett never complained. At 5 a.m., he swept the mats himself. At 6 o'clock, construction workers came in for boxing cardio before their shifts. At 4 o'clock p.m., teenagers from the neighborhood filled the gym after school because Brett charged almost nothing. Some paid $20 a month. Some paid nothing at all. The heavy bags were old enough to split open along the seams. Brett patched them with black duct tape instead of replacing them. The treadmill near the wall only worked if someone kicked the side panel twice. Still, the gym stayed open, mostly because Brett refused to let it die. That refusal confused Vanessa more every year. "You're killing yourself for people who can't even pay membership fees," she told him one Thursday night while standing in their kitchen in Westlake. The kitchen looked like it belonged in a real estate catalog. White marble island, hanging pendant lights, stainless steel appliances. Vanessa had chosen everything herself after her 3rd year selling luxury properties around Cuyahoga County. Brett sat at the counter eating reheated chili from a ceramic bowl. His hands were wrapped in white athletic tape from training earlier that night. "They're kids," he said quietly. "They're not your responsibility." He shrugged once. That answer irritated her more than arguments ever did. Vanessa Ross liked reactions, emotion, defensiveness, something she could push against. Brett rarely gave her any. She opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator harder than necessary. You know, Melissa Carter asked me at the office party if you were still doing that cage fighting thing, Vanessa said. Brett kept eating. I didn't even know what to say anymore. You could have said I coach boxing. That's not the point. No, it wasn't. The point was status. Vanessa sold expensive homes to surgeons, attorneys, and finance executives. Men wore Rolex watches to dinner reservations downtown. Their wives talked about Aspen ski trips and private schools and waterfront investments. Then there was Brett, a former fighter driving a rusted truck with $47 in his checking account most weeks. At least that was what everyone believed, Vanessa included. Brett rinsed his bowl in silence. You know what your problem is, Vanessa asked. He dried his hands with a paper towel. You still think hard work fixes everything. Brett looked toward the dark kitchen window for a second before answering. No, he said calmly. I just think quitting breaks everything. Vanessa laughed under her breath. Not because it was funny, because she thought it sounded pathetic. That same night, after she went upstairs, Brett pulled on a gray hoodie and left the house again at 11:40 p.m. The roads were empty, except for snowplows pushing dirty ice toward curbs. He drove back to South Harbor Fight Club. The gym lights stayed off. Only the office lamp near the ring glowed dimly inside. Brett wrapped his hands again. Then he trained alone. 3-minute rounds, jump rope, shadow boxing, heavy bag work, sprawl drills until sweat soaked through his hoodie. His left knee still hurt during pivots. The old injury never disappeared completely. Winter made it worse. Sometimes he limped getting out of bed. But Brett understood something younger fighters didn't. Pain stopped mattering after enough years. He trained until nearly 2 a.m. Then he sat alone on the ring apron, breathing hard, while old radiator pipes rattled inside the walls. A framed newspaper clipping hung crooked near the office door. Local fighter falls, short of UFC contract. Brett stared at it for a long time. Most men would have taken it down years ago. Brett left it there on purpose, not as motivation, as memory. He knew exactly what people saw when they looked at him now. A man who almost mattered. A man teaching boxing classes to kids while his wife climbed into a different social world without him. A man surviving instead of winning. Outside the gym, snow tapped softly against the windows. Brett stood slowly and walked toward the office. His phone vibrated on the desk. Unknown number. Las Vegas area code. He almost ignored it. Almost. Yeah, Brett answered. Static crackled briefly on the line before a deep voice spoke. This is Ray Mercer from Silver Strike Promotions. Brett said nothing. We heard you're still training. A pause. Sometimes. Ray chuckled softly. That's good, because we've got a problem. Brett leaned against the desk. On the wall behind him hung faded fight posters from another life. What kind of problem? One of our main card fighters tore his shoulder. Yesterday. Championship bout. Pay-per-view event at T-Mobile Arena. Next month. Brett's eyes narrowed slightly. We need a replacement. The radiator hissed behind him. Ray continued. You win purse hits 7 figures after pay-per-view percentages. Brett looked down at his wrapped hands. The knuckles were swollen and scarred, beneath old tape. You still there? Ray asked. Brett's voice stayed flat. Who's the opponent? Damian Voss. That name changed the air inside the room. Damian Voss was younger, faster, 29 years old, national media favorite, 8-fight win streak, corporate sponsorships, ESPN appearances, a killer. Ray lowered his voice slightly. Look, Brett, people still remember your name out here. Barely. This thing sells because nobody thinks you can survive 3 rounds. Brett walked slowly toward the ring. The canvas smelled like bleach and old sweat. How long do I have? Need an answer by tomorrow morning. Brett stared across the empty gym. Every broken thing inside it suddenly looked sharper. The patched bags, the cracked mirrors, the old newspaper clipping. The life everyone assumed was finished. Finally, Brett spoke. Send the contract. Then he hung up. Upstairs in their house across the city, Vanessa Ross was already asleep beside a charging phone full of unread messages from Derek Holloway. And for the first time in years, Brett Ross stood completely still in the middle of the dark ring and realized the world was about to make a very expensive mistake. Vanessa Ross understood presentation better than most people understood honesty. That was why clients trusted her. By 36, she had become one of the top luxury real estate agents in Cuyahoga County. She sold restored lakefront homes in Bratenahl, glass-walled penthouses downtown, and gated properties in Hunting Valley, where security cameras cost more than most cars. She knew how wealthy people wanted things to look. Perfect kitchens, perfect lighting, perfect marriages, especially perfect marriages. Online, Vanessa and Brett still looked solid. Anniversary dinners at Marble Room Steakhouse. Christmas photos in coordinated winter coats. A smiling couple holding champagne glasses during charity events downtown. The comments underneath her Instagram posts always sounded the same. You two are relationship goals. Real love still exists. So inspiring after all these years. Vanessa liked those comments. She read nearly all of them. Brett never did. At home, the performance disappeared fast. Their house in Westlake had become quiet. In the dangerous way, wealthy homes often became quiet, not peaceful, controlled. Conversations shortened into logistics. Dry cleaning, mortgage auto pay, dinner reservations. Who was picking up groceries? Some nights, they barely spoke at all. Brett noticed the changes long before he admitted them to himself. Vanessa stopped asking how training went, stopped attending amateur fights at the gym, stopped touching him casually in kitchens or hallways. The distance came slowly enough to seem temporary. At first, then it stayed. One Friday evening, Brett walked into the kitchen after a 12-hour day at South Harbor Fight Club and found Vanessa sitting at the marble island with her laptop open. She was still wearing heels from work. Black blazer, gold earrings, hair perfectly straightened. 2 wine glasses sat nearby. Only one had been used. "You had company?" Brett asked. Vanessa closed the laptop halfway. "Just Derek." Brett pulled a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Derek Holloway. The name had started appearing more often over the past year. Derek specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate separation agreements. 43 years old, tailored suits, expensive watches, former partner at a Chicago law firm before relocating to Cleveland. Vanessa described him as brilliant. Brett had met him twice. That had been enough. He needed advice about a property acquisition, Vanessa said casually. Brett nodded once. Maybe she expected jealousy. Questions, accusations. He gave her none. That silence frustrated her more lately. "You know," Vanessa said, "most husbands would care a little more when another man spends this much time around their wife." Brett unscrewed the water bottle. "Most husbands probably have more free time than me." Her jaw tightened slightly. Again, no reaction. Vanessa stood and walked toward the living room windows, overlooking the dark backyard. "You ever think about what your life would have been if you'd stopped chasing fighting?" she asked. Brett leaned against the counter. "I did stop." "No, your body stopped. Your ego didn't." Outside, snow fell softly against the patio furniture. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You're still waiting for some comeback story." Brett studied her quietly. There was a time he would have defended himself, explained, argued. Now he mostly observed. That was what years inside fighting gyms taught men. People usually revealed themselves if given enough silence. "You know what I think," Vanessa continued. "I think you miss being important." Brett drank water slowly before answering. "I was never important." That answer caught her off guard for half a second. Then she laughed softly. "See that right there? That's exactly why nothing changes." She walked upstairs without another word. Brett stayed in the kitchen another 10 minutes after she left. Not angry, just tired. The microwave clock read 11:14 p.m. Eventually, he headed upstairs himself. Vanessa was already asleep facing the opposite side of the bed. Her phone rested face down on the nightstand beside her. It buzzed once, then again. Brett normally ignored it. Tonight he didn't. The screen lit up briefly. Derek Holloway. The preview disappeared before he could read the message itself. Brett stared at the phone for several seconds, then looked at Vanessa, sleeping peacefully beside him. He rolled it onto his back and stared at the ceiling instead. The next morning, Brett woke before dawn as usual. He drove through icy streets toward the gym, while local sports radio discussed college football recruiting scandals and Brown's off-season rumors. Nobody mentioned his comeback fight yet. Silver Strike Promotions hadn't announced the replacement publicly. At South Harbor Fight Club, Brett trained harder than he had in years. More rounds, more conditioning, longer sparring sessions. His knee swelled every night afterward. He iced it in silence while sitting alone in the office after classes ended. 3 weeks before the fight, he returned home near midnight and found Vanessa still awake in the downstairs office. That alone felt unusual. She normally slept early before property showings. The office door was slightly open. Brett walked past quietly toward the kitchen, then stopped. Vanessa was laughing softly inside. Not work laughter. Different. Warmer. Brett heard Derek's voice through speakerphone. Timing matters, Derek was saying. I know, Vanessa replied. You just need to wait. Brett stood motionless in the hallway. The hardwood floor felt cold through his socks. You're sure about this? Derek asked. Vanessa answered immediately. I should have done it 2 years ago. Silence. Then Derek again. After the championship payout, everything becomes easier. Brett's expression didn't change. Not visibly, but something inside him settled into place with frightening clarity. He stepped backward quietly before either of them noticed him. Then he walked into the kitchen loudly enough for footsteps to become audible. Inside the office, Vanessa's conversation stopped instantly. A second later, she appeared in the doorway, holding her phone. Oh, you're home. Brett grabbed a protein shake from the refrigerator. Yeah, you're late. Jim. She watched him carefully. You okay? Brett twisted the bottle cap open. Tired. That was all. Vanessa studied him another second, almost suspicious he might have heard something. Then she relaxed. Derek's helping with a commercial contract dispute, she explained casually. Brett nodded while drinking. No questions. Again. Later that night, Vanessa fell asleep first. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows. Brett sat beside the bed, scrolling through training footage on his phone. Vanessa's iPad rested charging on the dresser nearby. The screen suddenly lit up. A message banner appeared across the top. Derek Holloway. Wait until after the championship payout clears. Brett stared at the words. Then another message arrived. You'll have leverage once the money lands. The room stayed silent, except for rainfall. Brett walked slowly across the bedroom. He picked up the iPad. No passcode. Vanessa had stopped hiding things carefully because she believed Brett wasn't paying attention anymore. That was her first real mistake. The message thread opened instantly. Weeks of conversations, mentions of payout schedules, asset division, timing, strategy. One message from Vanessa stopped him cold. He doesn't even realize what's coming. Brett read the sentence twice. Not because it shocked him, because it confirmed something he had spent months refusing to name directly. This marriage was already over. Vanessa just wanted the timing to benefit her financially. He placed the iPad back exactly where it had been. Then he returned to bed without waking her. The darkness inside the room felt different now, cleaner, more honest. Vanessa slept peacefully and inches away from him while winter rain slid down the glass outside. Brett stared into the darkness for nearly an hour, before finally reaching toward the nightstand and grabbing his phone. At 1:12 a.m., he opened the contact information. Silver Strike Promotions had emailed him. Then he scrolled lower. One more number sat underneath it. Caroline Pierce, financial structuring attorney. Brett looked once toward Vanessa sleeping beside him. Then he pressed call. Caroline Pierce worked on the 22nd floor of a quiet office building on Euclid Avenue where wealthy people solve problems without raising their voices. No giant logo outside, no polished reception theater, no framed motivational quotes hanging on walls. Just dark wood floors, soft lighting, and a receptionist who spoke like every sentence cost money. Brett arrived at 8:10 the next morning, wearing faded jeans, work boots, and a navy hoodie pulled over a thermal shirt. Snow melted off his shoulders as he stepped into the office lobby. The receptionist glanced at him once, not judgmental, just surprised. "Mr. Ross?" she asked. Brett nodded. "Ms. Pierce is expecting you." The office overlooked downtown Cleveland through floor-to-ceiling windows streaked lightly with winter rain. Caroline Pierce stood near the glass, holding a tablet when Brett entered. She looked younger than he expected, early 40s, sharp features, dark green suit, hair tied back tightly, no wasted movement, no unnecessary smile. "You called at 1 in the morning," she said calmly. Brett sat across from her desk. "Sorry. You sounded like someone who finally stopped lying to himself." That earned the smallest reaction from him. Caroline noticed. "You fight professionally long enough," she continued. "You learn how men sound when they've been hit hard." Brett leaned back slightly. "I need advice before my fight contract gets finalized." Caroline opened a folder already sitting on her desk. She had done research overnight. That told Brett immediately what kind of attorney she was. "You're married 11 years, she said. "Ohio equitable distribution laws. No prenup. Prize money could absolutely become contested property depending on timing and structure." Brett stayed silent. Caroline studied him for a moment. "Tell me what's really happening." Outside the windows, traffic crawled through wet downtown streets. Brett looked toward the skyline before answering. "My wife's waiting until after the payout to leave." "Evidence?" "Yes." "Affair I don't know." Caroline nodded once, like that detail barely mattered. Emotion rarely interested attorneys like her. Documentation did. "You planning revenge?" she asked. "No." "Good. Revenge makes people sloppy." She tapped her tablet screen. "Your promoter's offering a base purse plus pay-per-view percentages. Money hasn't been assigned yet." "That matters." Brett listened carefully. Caroline continued. "There are legal ways to protect future earnings before they become marital assets. Especially if the structure serves legitimate, non-personal purposes." Brett rubbed one scarred knuckle slowly against his palm. "I don't want hidden offshore accounts or fake companies." "That's good," Caroline said, "because those fail in court." She slid a yellow legal pad toward him. "Who matters to you more than money?" The question came instantly. No hesitation. "My nephew." Caroline waited. "Tell me." Brett looked down at the desk for several seconds before speaking again. "His name's Ethan Cole. He's 16. The office stayed quiet except for distant rain against glass. "My younger sister Rachel, she got prescribed Oxy after a car accident years ago." Caroline's expression didn't change. She never got off it. Brett swallowed once. "She died in Akron 3 years ago." Those words landed flat and controlled, almost emotionless. That was how grief sounded after enough time passed. Ethan's father disappeared before he was born, Brett continued. Kid's been bouncing between relatives ever since. Caroline wrote nothing down. She just listened. I've been paying for his school clothes, food sometimes, basketball fees, whatever I can. And if you win this fight, Brett looked toward the rainy city again. I want his future locked down before anybody starts fighting over percentages. For the first time since he entered the office, Caroline's expression softened slightly. Not sympathy, recognition. Okay, she said quietly. Now we're talking about protection instead of hiding. She stood and walked toward a bookshelf filled with financial law binders. There's another issue, she added. Brett waited. Fighters your age don't usually get second chances. He gave a faint nod. If you win, Caroline continued, everyone around you changes overnight. Family, friends, lawyers, reporters. People start seeing numbers instead of a human being. Brett almost smiled at that. Too late for that. Caroline pulled a binder free. No, trust me. It gets worse after success. 2 hours later, legal diagrams covered the conference table. Irrevocable trust structures, charitable allocations, educational provisions, tax implications. Brett read every page carefully. He didn't pretend to understand all of it immediately, but he asked precise questions. What can be challenged? What survives court review? What look dishonest? Caroline appreciated that. Most clients wanted loopholes. Brett wanted stability. By noon, rain turned into sleet outside. Caroline finally circled one paragraph with a black pen. This, she said. This is your safest route. The trust would be established before the fight, not after. That mattered enormously. Primary beneficiary, Ethan Cole. Educational trust allocation. Secondary allocation, neurological trauma. Recovery grants for retired combat athletes. Independent trustee management. No direct personal control afterward. Clean, defensible, legitimate, most importantly, legal. Brett stared at the paperwork silently. You sure about this? Caroline asked. It's the right thing. No, she corrected calmly. I'm asking if you're emotionally prepared. Brett frowned slightly. If your wife files after this happens, there is no going backward emotionally. You understand that? He looked down at the stack of documents. The marriage already felt broken. This would simply remove the final illusion. Finally, Brett nodded once. Yeah. Caroline placed the signature pages in front of him. Then sign. The pen felt strangely heavy in his hand. Outside downtown, Cleveland disappeared beneath gray winter fog while Brett Ross quietly signed away future control of money he hadn't even earned yet, page after page. Initials, dates, witness acknowledgments. When it finished, Caroline collected the documents carefully into a dark navy folder. No one besides us, the trustee, and your financial manager knows this exists, she said. Brett stood slowly. That's how I want it. Caroline walked him toward the office door. You know, she said casually, most people in your situation would try to protect themselves first. Brett pulled on his hoodie. I am protecting myself. Caroline studied him for a second. Then she understood. Because sometimes the safest thing a man could do was make sure money stopped belonging to him before betrayal officially arrived. As Brett stepped into the hallway, Caroline spoke again. "One more thing." He turned. "If your wife files after the fight," Caroline said, "don't react emotionally in the room. Let the paperwork speak first." Brett nodded once. "Okay." And Brett, "Yeah." People reveal themselves fastest when they think they're about to win. The elevator ride down felt strangely quiet. Brett stood alone, watching floor numbers descend while downtown traffic moved beneath icy street far below. When the elevator doors opened into the parking garage, cold wind swept inside immediately. His old Ford started rough on the second ignition attempt. The heater barely worked. None of that bothered him anymore. At a red light near Prospect Avenue, Brett's phone vibrated through the center console. "Vanessa." He answered through Bluetooth. "Hey." Her voice sounded unusually warm. "You still at the gym number downtown?" "Oh." A pause. "You want to do dinner tonight?" Brett looked through the windshield at slush spraying behind passing cars. "Sure. There's a new steak place opening near Crocker Park. Melissa and her husband invited us." Another pause. "They'll probably ask about the fight." Brett understood the subtext immediately. "Don't embarrass me." "That okay, Vanessa?" asked carefully. "Yeah?" Her tone brightened slightly. "Good. Wear something nice, okay?" The call ended. Brett drove the remaining 20 minutes through gray winter traffic, thinking about how strange human behavior became around money people hadn't even seen yet. That night at dinner, Vanessa smiled constantly. She touched Brett's arm while talking, laughed louder than usual, introduced him proudly as "my husband, the fighter." Melissa Carter's husband even bought Brett a whiskey after hearing about the Vegas comeback. Everyone at the table suddenly sounded impressed, hopeful, interested. Brett noticed all of it, Vanessa especially, because for the first time in years, she looked at him the way ambitious people looked at rising stock prices. Not with love, with calculation. And sitting there, beneath expensive restaurant lighting, while Vanessa smiled beside him beautifully for strangers, Brett realized something cold and permanent. She already thought the money belonged to both of them. What Vanessa Ross didn't know was that less than 8 hours earlier, Brett had legally removed himself from ownership before she ever filed a single document. Ket, Thuk, Fan 4, Fa and 5. Las Vegas looked artificial, even at midnight. Artificial lights, artificial waterfalls, artificial smiles. Everything on the Strip existed to convince people they were richer, luckier, or more important than they actually were. Brett Ross noticed that within 5 minutes of arriving. His flight landed just after 9:30 p.m. 3 black SUVs from Silver Strike Promotions waited outside Harry Reid International Airport, lined neatly beside the curb, while photographers hovered nearby, hoping for celebrity sightings. Brett climbed into the last SUV, carrying only a black duffel bag and a winter coat from Cleveland. No entourage, No nutritionist. No social media team filming content. Just him. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You, Ross." "Yeah." The driver nodded once and pulled onto Paradise Road toward the Strip. Gigantic LED screens flashed advertisements across glass towers outside the window. Casinos glowed against the desert darkness like giant electrical fires. Brett stared quietly at everything passing by. He had fought in Vegas before. Smaller venues mostly. Never anything this large. Never T-Mobile Arena. Never a pay-per-view main event. The fight announcement had exploded online 3 days earlier. Most reactions sounded identical. Brett Ross is too old. This is a setup fight. Damian Voss is going to destroy him. Even sports analysts treated the matchup like a retirement ceremony, disguised as competition. ESPN's morning panel gave Brett less than a 10% chance of surviving 5 rounds. One commentator actually laughed while discussing the fight. Silver Strike basically dragged a mechanic out of Cleveland for this. Brett watched the clip once, then never again. By the time that the SUV reached the Aria Resort, cameras already waited outside the entrance. Flashbulbs exploded the moment Brett stepped out. Questions flew immediately. "Brett, are you worried about ring rust? How bad is the knee really? Is this your final fight no matter what?" Brett ignored most of them. A Silver Strike employee guided him through the lobby quickly. The hotel smelled like expensive cologne-polished marble and casino cigarette smoke drifting faintly from downstairs gaming floors. Everything inside looked impossibly clean, too clean. Brett preferred gyms. Real places sweated. His room sat on the 32nd floor overlooking the Strip. Massive windows stretched from floor to ceiling. Somewhere far below, traffic moved like glowing veins through the city. Brett dropped his duffel beside the bed. Then immediately unzipped it. Hand wraps, mouthpiece, training shoes. Routine mattered. That was how fighters stayed calm. His phone buzzed. "Vanessa, you make it?" she asked. "Yeah." "How's the hotel big?" She laughed softly. "That's your review." Brett looked across the room. "Pretty much." Vanessa sounded different lately. Lighter. More attentive. Especially after the fight announcement became public. "I fly in tomorrow morning," she said. "Silver Strike booked me first class." "Okay. You should see the media coverage, Brett. This thing's huge." He sat on the edge of the bed slowly. "You excited?" Vanessa asked the question carefully. Brett thought about it. "No," he answered honestly. "Focused." A pause followed. Then Vanessa said, "Well, try to look happy sometimes this week. Cameras are everywhere." The line disconnected shortly afterward. Brett placed the phone face down on the nightstand and stared through the glass windows toward the neon skyline. Vegas rewarded appearance more than substance. That made it dangerous. The next morning, Silver Strike organized open workouts at a promotional gym near the arena. Reporters packed the building shoulder to shoulder while camera operators shouted for angles. Damian Voss arrived first, 29 years old, undefeated in his last 8 fights. Sharp beard line, expensive headphones, sponsored athletic gear with 3 visible logos. The crowd reacted immediately when he entered. Voss understood performance, shadowboxing for cameras, smirking during interviews, signing gloves for fans. Then Brett walked in wearing a plain gray hoodie without branding. No reaction at first. A few people barely recognized him. One younger reporter whispered, "That's him." Another replied quietly, "Looks smaller than I expected." Brett heard both comments. Neither mattered. He wrapped his hands in silence while Voss performed for cameras across the gym. A promoter approached Brett holding a microphone. "Mind giving us some energy today?" the man joked. Brett looked up calmly. "I came to fight." The promoter forced a laugh and walked away. An hour later, Vanessa arrived and immediately transformed into exactly who Vegas rewarded. White designer blazer, gold jewelry, perfect makeup. She moved through the crowd, naturally smiling for photographers and greeting sponsors like she belonged there. People noticed her instantly, especially men. Brett watched from the ring corner while Vanessa laughed beside a group of executives holding cocktails near the VIP section. One of them was Derek Holloway. That surprised him less than it should have. Derek wore a charcoal suit with no tie, expensive watch visible beneath his cuff. He leaned close while speaking to Vanessa, comfortable enough to place a hand lightly against her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. Too familiar. Brett continued hitting mitts without reacting. Left hook, right cross, slip, counter. Across the gym, Vanessa glanced toward him once, only once, then turned back toward Derek, smiling. Later that afternoon, Brett finished a conditioning session alone inside the fighter training room beneath T-Mobile Arena. The place smelled like disinfectant and rubber flooring. A television mounted high on the wall replayed sports coverage. Brett sat against the lockers, icing his knee, while commentators discussed betting odds. Damian Voss by knockout is currently the easiest money in Vegas. One analyst laughed. Another added Ross hasn't fought at this level in years. Honestly, I'm worried about his safety. Brett muted the television. He preferred silence. A few minutes later, footsteps echoed outside the locker room hallway. Vanessa appeared carrying 2 iced coffees. "You disappeared," she said. "Training." She handed him one drink before sitting beside him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Vanessa looked toward the ice wrap around his knee. "You scared?" she asked quietly. Brett adjusted the wrap. "No, you should be." He looked at her, not offended, just curious. Vanessa sighed softly. "Brett. Damian Voss is younger, faster, healthier. Everybody knows that." "Okay, you don't have to pretend with me." That almost made him smile. Pretending was the one thing he had stopped doing months ago. Vanessa studied his face carefully. "You know what your problem is?" she asked again. Brett waited. "You never understand when something's already over." The sentence hung heavily inside the cold room. Brett looked toward the concrete floor beneath his boots. Maybe she meant biting. Maybe the marriage. Maybe both. Before he could answer, Vanessa's phone buzzed. "Derek." The name flashed clearly across the screen. She declined the call quickly. Too quickly. "I should go," she said while standing. Brett nodded once. Vanessa hesitated another second before leaning down and kissing his cheek lightly. The gesture felt rehearsed. For cameras, for image, for herself. Then she left. Brett sat alone again, listening to the distant roar of arena crews setting up upstairs. Hours later, he walked through the casino floor, returning to his room after midnight. Thought machines flashed endlessly around him. People celebrated things that barely mattered. At the far end of the lobby bar, Brett noticed Vanessa immediately. She sat beside Derek Holloway in a private booth partially hidden behind decorative glass panels. Wine glasses, laughter. Derek leaning close enough to whisper something into her ear. Vanessa touched his arm while smiling. Not shocked, not guilty, comfortable, like this had been happening for a while. Brett stopped walking for exactly 2 seconds, then continued toward the elevators without changing expression. Inside the mirrored elevator, he stared at his own reflection under fluorescent light. Bruised knuckles, tired eyes, gray in his beard now. The doors opened on the 32nd floor. Brett walked quietly toward his room, while casino music echoed faintly below. Tomorrow night, the entire world expected him to fail publicly inside T-Mobile Arena. What none of them understood was this: Brett Ross had already lost the one thing he once feared losing. And men became extremely dangerous after that. Fight night in Las Vegas always started quietly. That surprised people who had never been inside professional combat sports before. The screaming came later. The violence came later. Hours before the lights and cameras and blood arenas felt almost like churches. Silent hallways, whispering staff, security guards speaking softly into earpieces, fighters sitting alone with thoughts heavy enough to crack concrete. T-Mobile Arena smelled like electrical equipment, fresh canvas, and nervous sweat by 5:30 p.m. Brett Ross sat inside locker room B17 with both hands wrapped and elbows resting on his knees while an athletic commission doctor checked his pupils under fluorescent lights. "You taking any medication?" the doctor asked. "No." "Any dizziness this week?" "No." The doctor signed paperwork without another question. Outside the room, distant bass from the arena speakers vibrated faintly through concrete walls. The undercard fights had already started. Crowds were building. Betting numbers kept moving heavily toward Damian Voss. Brett remained calm, not because he felt confident, because fear stopped feeling useful years ago. His striking coach, Leon Baxter, stood nearby, taping extra padding around Brett's left knee. Leon had trained him since his 20s. Thick, gray beard, broken nose, former Golden Gloves boxer, who spoke only when necessary. "You good?" Leon asked quietly. Brett nodded once. Leon tightened the tape harder. "You don't owe anybody fireworks tonight," he said. "Make him work." Brett understood exactly what that meant. Young fighters burned energy, proving dominance. Old fighters survived by making younger men impatient. A production assistant knocked briefly before opening the door. "Walk out in 25. Brett stood slowly, his knee already hurt. That was normal now. Across the arena, Damian Voss entered his own locker room, surrounded by cameras, sponsors, and social media staff recording everything for content clips. Silver Strike loved Voss. He looked marketable, spoke well on television, dressed like luxury advertising. Even his warm-ups looked expensive. Brett watched part of Voss's entrance on the locker room television, mounted high near the ceiling. The commentators sounded almost amused, discussing the matchup. Honestly, one of them said this feels more like a farewell appearance for Brett Ross than a competitive fight. Another laughed lightly. If Ross makes it past round 3, I'll be impressed. Leon muted the television immediately. Noise, he said. Brett appreciated that. At 6:12 p.m., Vanessa entered the locker room. White dress, diamond earrings, hair perfectly styled. She looked more prepared for a charity gala than a championship fight. Brett noticed. She carried herself differently tonight, lighter, almost excited, like someone already anticipating the next chapter of life. You nervous? Yet she asked softly. Brett adjusted the tape around his wrist. No. Vanessa smiled faintly. You always say that. She stepped closer and fixed the collar of his black walkout hoodie. The gesture looked intimate, caring. But Brett noticed something strange immediately. She avoided eye contact. People did that when they carried rehearsed emotions. You know, Vanessa said quietly, whatever happens tonight, I hope you're proud of yourself. That sentence landed oddly. Too final. Too carefully worded. Brett looked directly at her for what Vanessa hesitated. Then smiled again. For trying. There it was, the assumption underneath everything. That he was already beaten. Outside the locker room, crowd noise swelled louder as another undercard knockout finished upstairs. The walls vibrated faintly. A staff member appeared again. 10 minutes. Vanessa kissed Brett lightly on the cheek. Cold lipstick. Expensive perfume. Then she left without saying good luck. Leon watched the door close behind her. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, Leon said quietly, You already know, don't you? Brett stared toward the concrete floor. Yeah. Leon nodded once. No further explanation needed. Some truths became obvious long before words confirmed them. At 6:26 p.m., arena staff lined Brett up inside the dark fighter tunnel beneath T-Mobile Arena. Music thundered overhead. Pyrotechnic smoke drifted through colored lights. Thousands of people screamed somewhere beyond the tunnel opening. Brett rolled his shoulders slowly, while cameras circled nearby. A production coordinator shouted over the noise. Ready. Brett pulled his hood up, then walked forward. The crowd reaction hit immediately. Loud. Not supportive. Curious. Vegas audiences loved spectacle more than loyalty. Some cheered. Some booed. Most expected violence. Large screens overhead flashed old footage from Brett's early career, while announcers repeated his comeback narrative dramatically. Former contender. Career-ending injury. One last chance. The story sounded designed for nostalgia, not victory. Brett climbed into the cage calmly. Across from him, Damian Voss bounced lightly on his feet, already sweating with adrenaline. Younger, faster, sharp eyes full of confidence. Voss smirked when he saw Brett, then mouthed something impossible to hear through the arena noise. Probably intentional. Brett ignored him. Bruce Halpern, the veteran referee, called both fighters forward for instructions. "Protect yourselves at all times," he repeated professionally. Brett barely heard him. His focus narrowed now. Crowd noise faded. Lights blurred. Only movement mattered. The bell rang. Round 1 started fast. Too fast. Voss attacked immediately with combinations designed to overwhelm older reflexes. Sharp jabs, body kicks, constant movement. The crowd roared every time Brett absorbed a clean shot. Commentators sounded excited already. "Ross looks slow tonight. Voss is picking him apart early." Brett stayed patient. Guard tight. Small movements, no wasted energy. But Voss really was fast. A right hand slipped through Brett's defense midway through the round and snapped his head backward hard enough to wake the crowd even louder. Leon shouted instructions from the corner. "Don't chase him." Brett adjusted, clinched briefly, forced Voss backward against the cage, made him carry weight, little things, old fighter things. The first round ended heavily in Voss's favor. As Brett sat on the stool, breathing steadily, commentators continued talking like the ending already existed. "He can't keep observing this pace. Father Time remains undefeated." Leon pressed an ice pack against Brett's neck. "You seeing him now?" "Yeah." "You're loading too early." Brett nodded. Across the cage, Voss grinned confidently toward cameras while his team celebrated the opening round. The second round started worse. Voss sensed momentum and increased pressure immediately. Punches came faster now, sharp combinations to the body, low kicks targeting Brett's damaged knee. The crowd sensed possible collapse. Then it happened. 90 seconds into the round, Voss landed a brutal left hook, followed instantly by a straight right hand directly above Brett's eye. The shot crashed through his guard. Brett hit the canvas hard. 20,000 people exploded at once. The arena shook with noise. Blood streamed instantly down the side of Brett's face from a cut above the eyebrow. Voss raised both arms, already celebrating. Commentators shouted over each other. "He's done." "This should be stopped." Referee Bruce Halpern started the count. 1. Brett blinked blood from his eye. The canvas beneath him looked strangely calm. 3. His left knee throbbed violently. 5. Across the cage, Voss paced impatiently, like a predator smelling finish. Then something unexpected happened. Brett stopped rushing, stopped panicking, stopped caring about the crowd entirely. Instead, he heard another voice, his father's, long dead now, sitting beside old Blankenbriings in Cleveland decades earlier. "Stay calm," longer than the other man. Bam. Brett planted one glove against the canvas. The crowd roared, louder, sensing movement. 8. He stood, blood running down his cheek, breathing controlled, eyes suddenly clearer than before. Referee Halpern checked him carefully. "You good?" Brett looked past him toward Damien Voss. "Yeah." The fight resumed. And for the first time all night, Brett Ross finally started watching instead of surviving. The moment Brett Ross stood back up, the entire arena changed. Not emotionally, physically. Crowds could sense momentum shifts before commentators understood them. 20,000 people inside T-Mobile Arena leaned forward. Almost simultaneously, noise tightening into something sharper. Expectation. Damian Voss saw it too. That irritated him. Young fighters loved control. They loved opponents who stayed damaged after knockdowns. Brett refusing to collapse properly disrupted the script everybody expected tonight. Blood slid from the cut above Brett's eye and dripped onto the canvas as the fight resumed. Voss attacked immediately. Fast combinations, body shots, pressure against the cage. But something subtle had changed. Brett was no longer reacting late. Now he was reading. Watching shoulders, watching hips, watching breathing patterns. Older fighters survived because experience replaced speed eventually. And Damian Voss had started getting impatient. Leon noticed first from the corner. There he shouted. He's loading up. Now Brett saw it, too. Voss wanted the knockout highlight. Wanted the viral ending. Wanted the crowd screaming his name, while cameras captured Brett unconscious on the mat. That hunger made his punches slightly wider, slightly heavier, slightly predictable. 30 seconds later, Brett countered for the first time all night. A short right hand inside the pocket. Clean. Voss stumbled backward half a step in surprise more than pain. The crowd reacted instantly. Commentators shifted tone immediately. Oh, Ross finally landed something significant. Brett didn't chase him. That mattered. Young fighters chased damage emotionally. Brett stayed calm. Voss circled wider now, less comfortable than before. Blood continued dripping down Brett's cheek, but his breathing remained steady. Then another counter landed. This time, a left hook to the body. Voss winced, visibly. Leon pointed across the cage, screaming instructions. He hates body shots. Stay there. The second round ended. Seconds later, back in the corner, Leon pressed gauze against Brett's eyebrow while cutmen worked quickly under bright arena lights. You seeing him? Leon asked again. Yeah, he's emotional now. Brett spit blood into a towel. Across the cage, Voss argued loudly with his coaches. That was another mistake. Emotional fighters stopped listening carefully. The third round began slower. Voss still controlled speed, but uncertainty had entered his movements now. His confidence no longer looked effortless. Brett kept touching the body. Small shots, heavy shots, patient shots. Every impact drained Voss a little further. By midway through the round, the younger fighter's footwork slowed noticeably. Commentators began changing narratives live on air. Ross is dragging this into veteran territory. Voss may have emptied the tank early, trying to force the stoppage. Brett heard none of it. The world inside the cage had narrowed completely now. Movement, timing, breathing. Everything else disappeared. Then came the first real turning point. Voss threw a spinning elbow near the fence, trying to create a highlight reel finish. Too aggressive. Too desperate. Brett slipped underneath it. Counter right hand, directly on the jaw. The sound cracked through the arena microphones. Voss staggered sideways hard. The crowd exploded. For the first time all night, Damien Voss looked frightened. Not visibly, but Brett saw it. Experienced fighters always recognize the moment confidence cracked. And once it cracked, panic usually followed. The fourth round became ugly. Not cinematic, not graceful. Real fights rarely were. Sweat sprayed under bright lights. Breathing turned ragged. Gloves dragged slower across exhausted bodies. Voss kept trying to regain control with flashy combinations. Brett kept dismantling him quietly. Body shots, clinch pressure, short counters, nothing emotional, nothing wasted. At one point, cameras caught Vanessa Ross sitting cage-aside beside Silver Strike executives. Her smile had disappeared completely. She leaned forward tightly, gripping the edge of her chair now. Because something dangerous was happening. Brett might actually win. And winning changed everything. Halfway through the fourth, Voss landed another clean kick to Brett's damaged knee. Pain shot upward instantly. Brett nearly lost balance. The crowd roared again, sensing weakness. But he recovered immediately. No frustration, no anger, just adjustment. That calmness started infecting the entire fight. Voss became louder, Brett became quieter. One man forcing moments, the other waiting for them. By the fifth and final round, both fighters looked exhausted beneath the lights. The judges' scorecards likely remained close enough to matter. Silver Strike executives watched nervously from VIP seating now. The easy marketing narrative had disappeared. This was no longer a showcase. This had become survival. The bell rang for the final round. Leon grabbed at Brett's shoulders before he stepped forward. "You don't need perfect," he said. "You need one mistake." Brett nodded once. Across the cage, Damien Voss bounced heavily on tired legs while blood dripped from his nose. Then the final round began. Voss attacked recklessly, almost immediately. Too aggressive, too eager. Exactly what Brett had waited for. The younger fighter launched a wide combination near center cage, trying to overwhelm him with volume. Left hook, right hand, body kick. Brett slipped backward half a step, watched, calculated, then saw it. Voss dropped his right hand, returning from the combination, only for a fraction of a second. But long enough. Brett planted his feet, turned his hips, and fired a counter right hand directly through the opening. Perfect timing. Perfect angle. The punch landed flush against Damien Voss's jaw with horrifying precision. The entire arena gasped at once. Voss's body froze upright for a split second, then collapsed sideways onto the canvas. Hard. The sound echoed sickeningly through the cage. Crowd noise detonated instantly. People screamed. Commentators shouted over each other. Leon jumped onto the cage wall. Referee Bruce Halpern dove into position, beginning the count. But halfway through it, he stopped. Damian Voss wasn't getting up. Brett stood silently in the center of the cage, breathing hard, while blood continued running from the cut above his eye. No celebration yet, no screaming, just exhaustion. Then Bruce waved both arms. "Fight over!" T-Mobile Arena erupted. The noise became almost physical. Brett finally closed his eyes briefly, as years of pressure, failure, humiliation, and silence crashed inward all at once. Not joy. Relief. That was different. Silver Strike's staff rushed into the cage. Cameras surrounded Brett immediately. Microphones. Security guards. Production assistants. Shouting instructions. Someone wrapped a championship belt around his waist while arena lights swept wildly through screaming crowds. Brett. Over here, look at camera 3. How does it feel? Brett barely processed any of it. Then Bruce Halpern raised his hand officially. Winner by knockout? The crowd roared louder. And new Silver Strike heavyweight champion. More screaming. Brett Ross. Confetti cannons exploded above the arena. The giant overhead screens flashed his bloodied face across 20,000 seats. Then came the announcement that changed the atmosphere completely. The ring announcer raised his voice dramatically. With tonight's championship victory and pay-per-view bonus structure, Brett Ross earns a total purse exceeding $2.4 million. That number hit the arena differently. People reacted to money faster than they reacted to courage. Phones appeared instantly across the crowd. Commentators started discussing future endorsements already. Sponsors, interviews, potential comeback stories. The world had changed in less than 30 seconds. Brett noticed Vanessa immediately afterward. She entered the cage, smiling brightly, for cameras, now arms wrapping around him carefully, while photographers swarmed nearby. The performance had returned. Perfect wife, perfect moment, perfect public image. But Brett felt how cold her hands were against his shoulders. She whispered near his ear, softly enough cameras couldn't hear. "We need to talk after this. Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. We need to talk." Brett understood. An hour later, after medical checks and interviews finally ended, he sat alone inside the fighter locker room beneath the arena. The adrenaline crash had started. Every bruise hurt now. His left knee throbbed violently. Stitches closed the cut above his eyebrow. The room smelled strongly of antiseptic sweat and metallic blood. His championship belt rested across the steel table nearby. Heavy, real. Outside, arena crews dismantled equipment while distant voices echoed faintly through concrete hallways. Then the locker room door opened. Vanessa stepped inside wearing the same white designer coat from earlier. Perfect makeup, untouched. Perfect posture. In her hand sat a thick manila envelope. Brett saw the logo immediately. Holloway and Associates Family Law. Vanessa walked forward calmly and placed the envelope on the steel table directly beside the championship belt. The paper made a soft, sliding sound against metal. Then she looked at Brett and spoke the sentence she had probably rehearsed for weeks. I filed this afternoon. Brett looked down at the divorce papers silently. Outside the locker room, the crowd above still celebrated his victory. Inside the room, his marriage officially ended beside the belt he had nearly died winning. For several seconds, Brett Ross said nothing. The locker room felt strangely quiet after the chaos upstairs. Only the low hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence now. The championship belt rested on the steel table between him and Vanessa. Gold plates, black leather, and tiny blood stains near the edge, where his stitched eyebrow had touched it earlier. Beside the belt sat the divorce papers, neat, organized, prepared long before tonight. Vanessa stood with both hands folded calmly in front of her white coat. The posture looked practiced, controlled, like someone entering a business negotiation instead of ending a marriage. Brett looked down at the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Cuyahoga County Domestic Relations Court. Filed electronically at 3:14 p.m. Hours before the fight even started. You planned this carefully, Brett said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. I planned this realistically. He kept reading. Property division requests, financial disclosures, temporary asset preservation orders. Derek Holloway's name appeared at the top of every page. Brett flipped another sheet slowly. Vanessa watched him closely now. Waiting. Most people expected emotion after betrayal. Anger, shouting, accusations. Especially after a violent fight and a massive financial victory. Instead, Brett remained calm enough to unsettle her slightly. You're not surprised, she said. Brett finally looked up. No. That answer landed harder than yelling would have. Vanessa's expression shifted briefly, then hardened. Again. We both know this hasn't worked for years. Brett nodded once. Probably. You barely talk to me anymore. You stopped talking first. That's not fair. Brett almost smiled at that. Fairness. Interesting word tonight. Outside the hallway, rolling equipment carts rattled past, while arena workers dismantled temporary fencing after the event. Life moving on already. Vanessa stepped close toward the table. Look, Brett, I'm not trying to destroy you. He said nothing. I just want what's legally mine. There it was. Finally honest. Not love, not heartbreak, assets. Brett leaned back slowly against the locker. His body hurt everywhere now. The adrenaline had fully faded, leaving only exhaustion behind. Vanessa continued carefully. The championship money changes things. Brett looked at her for several seconds, then asked the only question that mattered. You filed today on purpose. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. That pause answered enough. Finally, she said Derek advised me to file immediately after the event. Of course he did. Brett lowered his eyes toward the paperwork again. Every signature line had already been prepared. Every timing decision calculated. Even tonight's outfit suddenly made sense. Vanessa had dressed for photographs because she expected cameras after the victory announcement, because she expected this moment. What she didn't expect was Brett remaining this calm. That uncertainty started creeping into her posture now. "You should say something," she muttered. "I'm reading. You don't seem upset." Brett turned another page slowly. "I'm tired." That answer frustrated her. Again, no explosion, no break-in, nothing she could emotionally control. The locker room door opened behind Vanessa. Derek Holloway entered, carrying a leather briefcase beneath one arm. Tailored charcoal suit, perfect hair. The kind of man who never looked physically uncomfortable anywhere. Brett Derek said professionally. "Hell of a fight tonight." Brett looked at him once. No response. Derek continued anyway. "I know this timing feels difficult, but filing tonight protects everyone legally, while financial disclosures remain fresh. Protects everyone." Interesting choice of words. Vanessa moved slightly closer toward Derek unconsciously. Brett noticed. So did Derek. Neither acknowledged it. Derek opened the briefcase calmly and removed another stack of documents. "We'll obviously need complete financial transparency regarding the championship purse and associated bonuses," he explained. "Pay-per-view percentages, sponsorship incentives, deferred compensation structures." Brett interrupted quietly. "You already looked into all that." Derek paused briefly. "Standard preparation?" "No, not standard. Targeted." Brett understood now exactly how long these conversations had been happening behind closed doors. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. "Don't act shocked, Brett. Everybody knew this fight could change your financial situation. Everybody. Not us. Not our future. Your financial situation." Again, honesty slipped through accidentally. Derek sat the new documents beside the divorce papers. "If we cooperate early," he said smoothly, "this process can remain very clean." Brett stared at him calmly, then slowly reached down beside the bench near his duffel bag. Vanessa watched the movement carefully. So did Derek. Brett unzipped the side compartment quietly, then removed a dark navy folder. The exact folder Caroline Pierce had handed him weeks earlier in Cleveland. Derek's expression remained confident at first, until Brett placed the folder gently onto the steel table. "What's that?" Vanessa asked. Brett ignored her. Instead, he slid the folder directly toward Derek. "You should read it." Something in Brett's voice changed the room instantly. Not threatening. Certain. Derek frowned slightly before opening the folder. The confidence lasted maybe 10 seconds, then disappeared. Brett watched it happen carefully. First confusion, then concentration, then stillness. Derek flipped pages faster now. Trust structure documents, assignment agreements, beneficiary allocations, transfer instructions, legal timestamps. Each signature dated before tonight's fight, before the payout, before Vanessa filed. The room grew very quiet. Vanessa looked at between both men impatiently. What Derek didn't answer immediately. That alone alarmed her. He reread one paragraph carefully, then another. His jaw tightened. "What is it?" Vanessa repeated sharply. Derek finally looked up. The purse wasn't assigned to Brett personally. Vanessa blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means the payout structure changed before the event." Her face tightened immediately. What are you talking about? Derek slid one document across the table toward her. Vanessa scanned it quickly without understanding most of the legal language. Trust beneficiary allocation, she muttered. What the hell is this? Brett remained seated quietly, while blood continued drying near the stitches above his eyebrow. The money transferred directly into an irrevocable trust, Derek explained carefully now. Before the fight. Vanessa looked at Brett in disbelief. You moved the money. No, Brett said calmly. I assigned future rights before they existed. Derek closed the folder slowly. He understood exactly how dangerous the distinction was legally. Vanessa did not. That's impossible, she snapped. You can't just hide money before a divorce. Brett finally stood, slowly, painfully, still calm. It's not hidden. Derek spoke before Vanessa could continue. Who structured this, Caroline Pierce? The reaction was immediate. Derek's face hardened. He knew the name. Every serious financial attorney in Cleveland knew the name. That explains it, he muttered quietly. Vanessa looked increasingly panicked now. No, this is fraud. This has to be fraud. Derek stayed silent. That silence scared her more than anything yet. Because if Derek Holloway looked worried, the situation was serious. Brett walked toward the sink and rinsed blood from his hands beneath cold water. The faucet hissed softly in the silence. Behind him, Vanessa's voice sharpened. You knew I was filing. Brett dried his hands carefully before answering. Yes. Her breathing changed slightly. How long? A while. And you did this anyway. Brett turned toward her. Not angry, not triumphant, just tired. You waited for the payout, he said quietly. I waited for certainty. Vanessa stared at him, speechless. For the first time all night, she no longer looked in control. Derek reopened the folder, quickly scanning details again. Educational trust allocations, neurological recovery funding, independent trustee oversight, legitimate charitable structure, clean documentation, everything properly dated, everything legally positioned before the fight occurred. Then Vanessa suddenly froze, looking at one page longer than the others. Her eyes narrowed. Who's Ethan Cole Brett's expression changed slightly for the first time. Not weakness. Memory. My nephew. The kid from Akron, yes. Vanessa looked back down at the trust papers again. Large portions of the future payout belonged to Ethan's educational provisions. The rest supported combat athletes with brain trauma. Not Brett personally. Not secretly. Not illegally. Purposefully. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes back toward him. You gave it away. Brett held her gaze calmly. No, he said. I gave it somewhere safe. Outside the locker room hallway, reporters still shouted questions somewhere in the distance. Upstairs, thousands of fans celebrated the comeback victory of Brett Ross. But inside room B17, beneath T-Mobile Arena, Vanessa Ross realized the man she thought she understood had been planning quietly weeks ahead of her. And for the first time that night, she had absolutely no idea what to do next. The internet turned Brett Ross into a comeback legend before sunrise. By 7 knockout clips flooded sports pages across TikTok, Instagram, ESPN, and YouTube. The video of Damian Voss collapsing to the canvas had already passed 3 million views overnight. Headlines spread everywhere. The old man who refused to stay down. Brett Ross shocks Vegas. From forgotten fighter to millionaire. Nobody outside room B17 knew the championship celebration had ended with divorce papers on a steel table. Brett flew back to Cleveland alone the next afternoon. Vanessa stayed in Las Vegas an extra day. She claimed it was for legal meetings. Brett didn't ask questions. He sat beside the airplane window watching clouds pass beneath the wing while his body stiffened more painfully with every hour after the fight. The bruises had fully arrived now. Purple ribs, swollen knuckles, deep ache in his knee. Winning always hurt more the next morning. When the plane landed at Hopkins International Airport, a small crowd waited near baggage claim, holding phones and requesting photos. Brett signed autographs politely, took pictures with teenagers, shook hands with strangers calling him inspiration. Then he drove his old Ford F-150 through freezing rain toward South Harbor Fight Club. The gym smelled exactly the same as before he left. Rubber mats, bleach, sweat-soaked into old canvas. That helped. Nothing inside the building cared about headlines. A group of teenagers training near the ring exploded with excitement the moment Brett walked through the door. "Coach, no way you knocked him out." Kids surrounded him immediately, asking questions all at once. Brett smiled faintly despite the pain. "Easy," he muttered. "My head already hurts." Leon Baxter appeared from the back office, carrying coffee. "You famous now," Leon said. "Temporary." Leon handed him a cup. "You see the numbers online now. That knockout bought this gym another 10 years. Brett leaned against the ring apron quietly. Maybe. Or maybe it bought lawyers more motivation. That afternoon, local news vans started parking outside the gym. Reporters wanted interviews, photos, human interest segments. The washed-up fighter who shocked the world. Brett declined almost all of them. That confused people. Most fighters chased attention after wins like this. Brett returned to teaching the 4 p.m. youth class instead. Footwork drills, jab mechanics, breathing discipline, simple things. At 5:17 p.m., his phone vibrated. Caroline Pierce. Brett stepped into the office and answered. "You back in Cleveland?" she asked. "Yeah." "How'd the locker room conversation go?" Brett sat carefully in the old office chair. "About how you'd expect." Caroline was silent briefly. Vanessa angry, confused first. That's usually worse. Rain tapped softly against the office windows, while voices echoed faintly from the gym outside. Caroline's tone sharpened slightly. "You need to understand something now, Brett. This stops being emotional from this point forward. It already is." "No," she corrected calmly. "You think it is. Vanessa and Holloway are about to turn this into strategy." Brett rubbed the bridge of his nose. "What happens next? Pressure. How? They'll try public narrative first." Brett frowned slightly, meaning Caroline didn't hesitate. You're the quiet fighter who secretly moved money before divorce. That story sells fast if they shape it correctly. Brett stared toward the gym floor outside his office. Kids laughed while skipping rope near the ring. Ordinary life continuing. Caroline continued. Do not post online. Do not defend yourself publicly. Do not argue emotionally through texts. I wasn't planning to. Good. Let them speak first. Brett understood that advice instinctively. Same principle as fighting. People exposed openings when they attacked too aggressively. That night, Vanessa finally returned to Cleveland. She didn't come home immediately. Instead, Brett received an email from Derek Holloway's office requesting formal financial disclosure meetings later that week. Professional, cold, transactional. The marriage now existed entirely through legal language. 3 days later, the first article appeared. Local champion accused of hiding millions before divorce. Then another. Inside Brett Ross's controversial trust structure. The articles carefully avoided direct accusations, but the implication remained obvious. Manipulation, deception, financial concealment. Sports blogs spread the story quickly because scandal traveled faster than discipline. Reporters started appearing outside South Harbor Fight Club daily. Some shouted questions as Brett unlocked the doors each morning. Did you intentionally hide assets from your wife? Is the trust a fraudulent transfer? Did Vanessa Ross know about Ethan Cole? Brett ignored all of it. No statements, no interviews, no emotional reaction. That silence irritated Vanessa, more than public fighting would have, because she couldn't control the narrative if Brett refused to participate emotionally. One evening, Brett returned home after training and found Vanessa sitting alone at the kitchen island. The television played muted cable news coverage about the fight. His knockout replay looped endlessly across the screen. Vanessa looked exhausted now, not glamorous, not polished. Angry people rarely slept well. You're making me look like a villain, she said immediately. Brett removed his wet jacket slowly. I haven't said anything. That's exactly the problem. He opened the refrigerator calmly. You filed for divorce after the fight. You moved millions into a trust. For Ethan. That's not the point. Brett closed the refrigerator door gently, then looked at her. That actually is the point. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You think you're morally superior because you gave money away? No. Then what? Brett stayed quiet for a second. You waited until you thought I was valuable. The sentence landed hard. Vanessa looked away immediately. That told him enough. You have no idea what it's like, she snapped suddenly, watching everyone else move forward while you stay stuck. Brett frowned slightly. Stuck? Yes. Brett. I built everything in this house while you trained teenagers in a broken gym. Interesting. Not we built. I built. Brett studied her carefully now. For the first time, she sounded less calculated and more honest than usual. That gym kept me alive, he said quietly. Vanessa laughed bitterly. It also kept you small. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, rain hit the windows harder now. Finally, Brett asked the question sitting underneath everything else. When did you decide to leave? Vanessa didn't answer immediately. That hesitation mattered. Then she whispered, probably before the fight got announced. Brett nodded slowly. Again, not surprised. Just confirmed. Vanessa rubbed both hands against her temples. You think this was all about money? A lot of it was. That's not fair. There's that word again. She looked up sharply. You know what your problem is, she said. You always act calm, so nobody can accuse you of being cruel. Brett leaned against the counter silently. Vanessa continued. You hide behind silence because it makes everyone else look emotional. That observation actually interested him. Maybe there was truth in it. Years fighting taught men dangerous emotional habits. Control became armor eventually. Still, Brett understood one thing clearly now. Vanessa didn't regret leaving. She regretted losing leverage. His phone buzzed suddenly on the counter. Caroline Pierce. Brett answered immediately. What happened? He asked. You need to come downtown tomorrow morning, Caroline said. Her voice sounded sharper than usual. Why we found financial movement. Brett straightened slightly. What kind of movement? Transfers from your joint accounts. Vanessa's eyes lifted instantly across the kitchen. Caroline continued. $48,000 moved over 6 months into something called Holloway Strategic Consulting LLC. Brett looked directly at Vanessa now. She froze. Completely froze. The silence inside the kitchen changed immediately. Not marital silence anymore. Legal silence. Careful silence. Dangerous silence. Brett spoke quietly into the phone. You sure? Yes, Caroline replied. And Brett? Yeah. I think your wife and Derek Holloway planned this a lot earlier than we thought. Brett slowly lowered the phone from his ear. Across the kitchen island, Vanessa's face had lost all color. And for the first time since the divorce papers appeared in Las Vegas, Brett realized this situation might become far uglier than either of them expected. The next morning, Cleveland looked frozen solid. Gray skies hung low over downtown, while dirty snow piled along curbs outside office buildings on Euclid Avenue. Brett Ross parked his old Ford beside a row of black luxury sedans outside Caroline Pierce's building and sat quietly for a moment before getting out. His ribs still hurt when he breathed too deeply. The bruises along his left side had turned dark purple now. Winning aged fighters fast. Inside the elevator, Brett watched floor numbers climb slowly toward the 22nd floor, while Caroline's words replayed in his head. $48,000. 6 months. Holloway Strategic Consulting LLC. Not emotional decisions. Planned ones. When the elevator doors opened, Caroline was already waiting near the conference room, holding a tablet and 2 thick folders. You sleep at all? She asked. Some. That's more than Vanessa probably did. Brett removed his coat slowly. You talked to her again? Not much. Caroline nodded once. Good. The conference room overlooked a frozen section of Lake Erie in the distance. Wind pushed snow across rooftops while traffic crawled through downtown streets far below. Caroline spread documents across the glass table methodically. Bank statements, transfer logs, corporate filings, timeline charts, no wasted motion. You know what people misunderstand about divorce attorneys? She asked while organizing papers. Brett sat quietly. The smart ones don't wait for emotions. They prepare for opportunities. She slid one statement toward him. Highlighted transactions covered nearly every page. $3,500, $7,200, $11,000. Smaller transfers spaced carefully over time. Not random enough to ignore. Not large enough to immediately attract attention. They layered the withdrawals, Caroline explained. That's intentional. Brett scanned dates silently. Most occurred months before the Vegas fight announcement. Meaning, he asked. Meaning Vanessa and Holloway likely anticipated future financial escalation before the championship contract even existed. Brett leaned back slowly. So this had started earlier than he realized. Much earlier. Caroline tapped another document. Holloway Strategic Consulting, LLC, was formed 11 months ago. Consulting for what? That's the interesting part. Caroline folded her arms. Nothing legitimate we can find. Brett looked toward the snowy windows briefly. Outside Cleveland looked cold enough to preserve secrets forever. Caroline continued. The LLC shares a mailing address with a commercial office suite Derek Holloway uses for secondary business registrations. So he was taking money directly. Possibly. Legally, Caroline gave the faintest shrug. That depends what he called it. Brett rubbed his jaw slowly. Retainers. Consulting fees. Pre-divorce planning. There were dozens of ways attorneys structured money if clients cooperated early enough. Caroline watched him carefully. You're angry. No. Yes, you are. You're just disciplined. That was probably true. Brett had spent decades controlling reactions under pressure. But inside, something colder than anger had started forming now. Clarity. The marriage hadn't failed naturally. Vanessa had already been planning exits while pretending everything remained normal. That mattered. Caroline opened another folder. This is where things get dangerous for them. Inside sat printed email chains. Brett frowned immediately. Where'd those come from? Discovery requests through Silver Strike Promotions. She slid the pages across the table. Vanessa Ross Vross at NorthPointRealty.com. To Silver Strike Financial Operations. Subject Championship Payout Timeline Inquiry. Brett read silently. Hello. Could you confirm approximate disbursement timing for athlete compensation? Following the Ross-Voss event, specifically regarding pay-per-view percentage release dates. Thanks, Vanessa Ross. The email was sent 16 days before the fight. Brett's expression hardened slightly. She was already planning division strategy, Caroline said calmly. Another email followed. Would payouts remain separate if delayed beyond filing dates? Another. Can percentages be frozen during active domestic proceedings? Caroline watched Brett carefully while he read. No spouse sends those questions casually, she said. No, and Holloway definitely coached the language. Brett placed the papers back onto the table, slowly. For a while, neither spoke. The heating vents hummed softly above them. Finally, Brett asked, What happens now? Caroline leaned back in her chair. Now we stop treating this like betrayal. and start treating it like sequencing. He frowned slightly, meaning courtrooms care about timelines more than feelings. That sentence stayed in the air. Caroline stood and walked toward the windows overlooking downtown. You know why your trust structure works so well? Because it's legal. No. She turned toward him. Because it happened before they acted. Brett understood immediately. Preparation beat reaction. Same rule as fighting, Caroline continued. Vanessa assumed she controlled timing. That was her biggest mistake. Brett stared at the frozen city below. Vanessa had always believed she understood positioning better than him, socially, financially, emotionally. Maybe she still did in some ways. But she underestimated patience. That mistake was becoming expensive. Later that afternoon, Brett returned to South Harbor Fight Club. Snow fell harder now, covering old potholes along East 55th Street, while local radio stations debated whether his Vegas knockout ranked among the greatest comebacks in combat sports history. Brett barely listened. Inside the gym, teenagers trained beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, while Leon Baxter fixed a torn speed bag mount near the ring. Leon glanced up when Brett entered. You look worse than yesterday. Feel worse, too. Leon snorted quietly. Good. Means you actually fought. Brett dropped his gym bag near the office. You busy tonight? Leon asked. Why? Leon tossed him a sports magazine. Brett's bloodied face covered the front page. Champion again. Brett stared at it without expression. Crazy world, Leon muttered. 3 weeks ago, nobody remembered your name. That part interested Brett more than the article itself. Success changed public memory instantly. Now, people treated him like he had always mattered. The gym door opened suddenly behind them. Vanessa walked inside. Everything in the room shifted slightly. The teenagers recognized her immediately from fight broadcasts and social media clips. Some whispered quietly. Vanessa ignored them. She wore a long camel-colored coat and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy weather outside. Brett looked at Leon once. Leon understood immediately and walked toward the back storage room without speaking. Vanessa approached the ring slowly. We need to talk. Brett stayed seated on the ring apron. Okay. She removed the sunglasses. Her eyes looked exhausted now, not emotional, cornered. You had Caroline investigating me. You had Derek planning divorce timing before the fight. That's not the same thing. Brett said nothing. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Derek says Caroline's trying to build some conspiracy narrative. Is she? Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation answered enough again. The gym echoed with gloves hitting heavy bags nearby. Normal sounds. Steady sounds. Vanessa lowered her voice. You really think I married you for money? No. Then what is this? Brett looked directly at her. I think somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as potential. The sentence hit harder than he intended. Vanessa looked away briefly toward the cracked mirrors along the wall. That's not fair. Maybe not. Silence settled between them. Then Vanessa asked quietly, "Are you trying to ruin me?" Brett genuinely looked surprised by the question. "No, because Derek says Caroline might come after financial misconduct claims. I didn't ask for that, but you're allowing it." Brett stood slowly, despite the pain in his ribs. "Vanessa," he said calmly, "you filed for divorce the same night I won a championship." Her jaw tightened. "You moved money before telling your wife. You started planning before telling your husband." That ended the argument instantly, because both of them knew it was true. Vanessa looked around the old gym for several seconds. The patched bags, the faded posters, the cheap fluorescent lights, places she once hated. Places Brett still protected. Finally, she spoke again, quieter this time. "You know what scares me?" Brett waited. "You don't seem hurt enough." That observation lingered between them. Maybe she expected devastation, collapse, begging. Instead, Brett simply looked tired. Because, deep down, the real heartbreak had probably happened months earlier, when he first realized she was already leaving emotionally. Vanessa picked up her sunglasses again. "Derek wants mediation next week." "Okay." She stared at him one last time, then asked carefully, "What exactly did Caroline find?" Brett held her gaze calmly. "Enough." Vanessa's face tightened immediately, and as she walked back toward the gym entrance, through the sound of gloves striking heavy bags, Brett realized something important. For the first time since Vegas, Vanessa Ross was no longer acting like someone preparing to win. She was acting like someone trying to figure out how much evidence already existed against her. Cuyahoga County Domestic Relations Court sat in a gray government building that looked exactly how divorce felt. Cold, functional, emotions stripped away and reorganized into paperwork. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the fight. Outside reporters already waited behind metal barricades, despite freezing wind blowing through downtown Cleveland. Satellite vans lined the curb while camera crews stamped their boots against the cold. A comeback champion. A millionaire trust dispute. A public divorce. The story had become too profitable for media to ignore. Brett Ross arrived alone in his old Ford F-150 at 8:47 a.m. No bodyguards, no PR team, no entourage. He wore a charcoal suit Leon Baxter had convinced him to buy after Vegas. The jacket fit awkwardly across his shoulders from years of fighting, but Brett barely noticed. His knee still hurt walking up courthouse steps. Winning the championship had not magically repaired age. Inside security screening, whispers followed him immediately. "That's him. The fighter. Man, he looks different in person." Brett ignored all of it. He had spent too many years inside locker rooms to care about spectators now. Caroline Pierce waited near courtroom 4B, holding 2 legal folders and a coffee she probably forgot to drink. "You sleep?" she asked quietly. "Enough. That's more than Holloway." Brett looked at her. Caroline adjusted the folders beneath one arm. He requested emergency review motions twice this week. Judge denied both. Interesting. Pressure was building on the other side now. Courtroom 4B smelled faintly like old paper and industrial cleaning chemicals. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while attorneys shuffled documents across wooden tables. Vanessa sat beside Derek Holloway, near the front already. Perfect posture. Cream-colored blazer. Hair immaculate. From a distance, she looked calm enough for magazine photography. But Brett noticed small things. Tight jaw. Restless fingers. The way she kept checking Derek's reactions before speaking. That wasn't confidence. That was dependency. Derek looked worse. Still polished. Still expensive. But tired around the eyes now. Too many late nights. Too many phone calls. Caroline leaned closer toward Brett before they sat down. "Remember," she said softly, "courtrooms reward discipline." Brett nodded once. Discipline, he understood. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered exactly at 9:31, early 60s, sharp silver hair, former financial litigation attorney before moving to family court. People online called her the spreadsheet judge because emotional arguments irritated her visibly. That worked in Brett's favor. Everybody stood. Then the hearing began. Derek Holloway opened aggressively. As the court can clearly see, he said smoothly while pacing beside the counsel table, Mr. Ross transferred anticipated marital assets into a protected structure shortly before filing became imminent. He sounded polished, controlled, practiced. Derek displayed timelines on courtroom monitors showing the trust creation shortly before the fight. The timing itself demonstrates intent. He argued this was a calculated maneuver to deprive Mrs. Ross of equitable access to marital property. Judge Whitaker looked down over reading glasses. Future property rights, assigned before realization, are not automatically fraudulent, Mr. Holloway. Derek nodded carefully. Correct, Your Honor. However, concealment and strategic deprivation absolutely matter. Concealment. Interesting word choice. Brett sat quietly beside Caroline, without reacting. The courtroom gallery behind them remained packed with reporters, pretending not to be fascinated. Derek continued. Mrs. Ross supported Mr. Ross financially during years of athletic decline. The sudden restructuring immediately before a massive payout, Caroline stood. Objection to characterization. Sustained. Judge Whitaker replied immediately. Proceed factually. Derek adjusted course smoothly. Factually, then, Your Honor, the trust effectively removed over $2 million from marital consideration immediately prior to divorce filing. Judge Whitaker turned toward Caroline. Ms. Pierce. Caroline rose slowly. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice. Just precision. Your Honor, opposing counsel keeps implying sequence without fully presenting sequence. She pressed a remote. A new timeline appeared across courtroom monitors. Dates, contracts, emails, bank transfers, structured cleanly. The trust structure was initiated before Mrs. Ross filed for dissolution. Caroline said calmly, more importantly before any marital separation discussion was disclosed by Mrs. Ross herself. Vanessa shifted slightly beside Derek. Caroline continued. Mr. Ross assigned contingent future rights into an irrevocable educational and neurological recovery trust benefiting his deceased sister's child and injured combat athletes. Judge Whitaker studied the documents quietly. Caroline moved to the next screen. This is not offshore concealment, not shell storage, not hidden ownership retention. She paused briefly. It is documented charitable and educational allocation. Derek stood immediately. With suspicious timing, Caroline looked directly at him. Yes, she said calmly. Timing matters enormously in this case. Something in her tone changed the air inside the courtroom. Brett noticed Judge Whitaker noticing it too. Caroline pressed another button. A new exhibit appeared on screen. Vanessa's email to Silver Strike Promotions. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Caroline read aloud. Could you confirm approximate payout timing following the Ross-Voss event? Another screen. Would payouts remain separate if delayed beyond filing dates? Another. Can percentages be frozen during active domestic proceedings? Derek's jaw tightened visibly now. Vanessa stared downward at the table. Caroline folded her hands calmly. These emails were sent before filing, she said. Before payout. Before the event itself. Judge Whitaker leaned slightly forward. To clarify, she asked, Mrs. Ross was already strategizing payout timing before dissolution filing. Caroline answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Derek stepped in quickly. My client simply sought financial understanding during marital uncertainty. Caroline didn't even look at him. Instead, she pressed another button. Bank statements appeared next. Highlighted transfers, amounts, dates, destination accounts, Holloway Strategic Consulting, LLC. The courtroom atmosphere shifted instantly, not emotionally, legally. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened slightly for the first time all morning. Caroline spoke carefully now. Over $48,000 transferred gradually from joint marital accounts into an LLC connected directly to Mr. Holloway's secondary business registration. Derek stood immediately. That characterization is misleading. Judge Whitaker looked directly at him. Then clarify it. For the first time, all hearing, Derek hesitated. Tiny pause. Still enough. It represented consulting retainers and strategic advisory fees, he answered finally. Before dissolution filing, the judge asked. Yes. Judge Whitaker removed her glasses slowly. That is highly unusual. The courtroom reporters started writing furiously now. Brett remained motionless beside Caroline. No satisfaction. No visible reaction. Just observation. Years inside cages had taught him something valuable. The man losing control first usually lost everything afterward. Derek attempted recovery quickly. Your Honor, none of this changes the central issue. Mr. Ross intentionally structured around equitable distribution. Caroline answered immediately. No, Mr. Ross prepared legally before Mrs. Ross executed a financially motivated filing strategy. The words landed cleanly. Financially motivated. That mattered. Vanessa finally looked toward Brett across the courtroom. He didn't look back. Instead, he stared quietly at the polished wood surface of the counsel table, while Caroline continued dismantling timelines piece by piece. No theatrics, just records, emails, dates, transfers. Truth organized professionally. Judge Whitaker reviewed documents silently for nearly 2 minutes afterward. The courtroom remained completely still, except for keyboard clicking from reporters. Finally, the judge spoke. "I am not prepared to invalidate the trust structure at this stage." Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Derek remained expressionless somehow, though the muscles in his jaw tightened visibly. Judge Whitaker continued. "However, I am deeply concerned regarding pre-filing financial coordination and undisclosed transfer patterns involving counsel-connected entities." Now the courtroom felt dangerous, because family court judges rarely used language like that casually. Derek stood carefully. "Your Honor." No, Judge Whitaker interrupted sharply. "I want full accounting records regarding Holloway Strategic Consulting, LLC, within 10 business days." Silence. Complete silence. Then the judge looked toward Vanessa directly. "And Mrs. Ross, I strongly advise full transparency moving forward." Vanessa nodded stiffly. Brett finally looked at her then, for just a second. She looked smaller somehow now. Not physically, structurally, like someone realizing the ground beneath them wasn't stable anymore. Judge Whitaker scheduled continued proceedings for the following month before striking the gavel once. Hearing adjourned. Instant chaos followed. Reporters rushed into hallways. Attorneys gathered papers rapidly. Court officers shouted directions. Derek leaned toward Vanessa, speaking urgently in low tones, while Caroline calmly closed her folders beside Brett. "You did good," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything." Exactly. That was the point. Outside courtroom 4B cameras exploded the moment the doors opened. Questions flew immediately. "Mr. Ross, any comment on the allegations? Did Vanessa Ross know about the trust?" "Mr. Holloway, are you under investigation?" Brett ignored everything while walking steadily beside Caroline toward the courthouse exit. Behind him, reporters surrounded Derek and Vanessa aggressively now. And for the first time since this entire war began, the public story was no longer about the fighter who protected his money. It was becoming about the people who may have planned to take it. 3 days after the hearing, the story turned against Vanessa Ross completely. Not loudly, quietly. That was worse. Public opinion shifted the same way cracks spread through ice on Lake Erie. Oh, wow at first. Then suddenly, impossible to stop. Sports blogs that once framed Brett Ross as a fighter, hiding money, started publishing different headlines. Did Vanessa Ross plan divorce? Around $1 million payout. Questions emerge about attorney-linked LLC. Timeline complicates claims against champion fighter. None of the articles accused Vanessa directly. They didn't need to. Questions alone damaged reputations when wealthy people relied on image for business. Vanessa's luxury real estate page stopped posting completely. Comments disappeared. Listings quietly transferred to other agents at North Point Realty. Brett noticed all of it without searching intentionally. People kept sending links, gym members, former fighters, even strangers online. Brett ignored most of them. At South Harbor Fight Club, life remained stubbornly ordinary. Teenagers still missed combinations. The heavy bags still needed repair. The roof still leaked when snow melted too quickly. That normalcy grounded him. One morning before sunrise, Brett stood alone inside the empty gym, wrapping his hands slowly, while snow tapped against the front windows. The building smelled like dust leather and old sweat. His phone vibrated across the ring apron. Caroline Pierce. "You awake?" she asked. "Usually." "Good. We got Holloway's accounting disclosure." Brett tightened the wrap around his wrist. And a pause. Then Caroline exhaled softly. "It's worse than I expected." That got his attention. Brett sat down slowly on the edge of the ring. "What did you find?" "Transfers categorized as strategic consultation fees." "That's legal though, right?" "Sometimes." Brett waited. Caroline continued carefully. "The problem is timing and overlap." He frowned slightly. Holloway was accepting money from Vanessa personally, while simultaneously positioning himself for percentage exposure involving your future earnings. Brett understood enough immediately. Conflict, self-interest, preparation. Caroline lowered her voice slightly. "And Brett, there are messages." "What kind of messages?" "Not criminal, but ugly." An hour later, Brett sat inside Caroline's conference room again while she slid printed email chains across the table. Some came from Vanessa, others from Derek Holloway, all dated months before the fight. Brett read silently. If Ross wins this thing, timing becomes critical. Another once payout clears, we file immediately. Another. He's emotionally predictable. Quiet men usually are. Brett stared at that sentence longer than the others. Emotionally predictable. Interesting. Because they had misunderstood silence entirely. Caroline watched him carefully. "You okay?" "Yeah. You don't seem surprised." Brett leaned back in the chair. "I think I stopped being surprised a while ago." Outside the windows downtown, Cleveland disappeared beneath thick snowfall. Caroline folded her arms. "You know what saves you here?" Brett looked at her. "You never reacted." That mattered more than people realized. No threatening texts, no public rants, no reckless financial withdrawals. Just documentation, discipline, preparation. Courtrooms trusted restraint more than outrage. Caroline pointed toward the emails again. Vanessa and Holloway built this around emotional assumptions. They thought you'd panic after the filing. Brett almost smiled faintly. They thought I'd fight emotionally. Exactly. But Brett understood fighting better than either of them. The first person swinging wildly usually lost. Later that afternoon, Brett visited Ethan Cole in Akron for the first time in nearly 2 months. The teenager lived with Rachel's older friend Denise Harper in a modest duplex near Firestone Park. Basketball shoes hung beside the front door. Laundry baskets crowded the hallway. Real life. Ethan opened the door, wearing an oversized Ohio State hoodie. "You look old on TV," the teenager said immediately. Brett laughed quietly. "I am old." Ethan stepped aside, smiling. News coverage of the Vegas knockout played constantly on sports channels lately. Even high school kids treated Brett differently now. That still felt strange. Denise served coffee in mismatched mugs, while Brett sat at the kitchen table reviewing Ethan's college prep paperwork. Grades looked strong. Scholarship, opportunities too. "You really setting up college money for him?" Denise asked quietly. After Ethan left the room, Brett nodded once. He deserves stability. Denise studied him carefully. "You know, most people wouldn't do that after suddenly becoming rich." Brett looked down at the paperwork. Most people probably weren't there when Rachel died. Silence settled briefly. The opioid overdose still existed like a permanent bruise inside him. Not visible, always present. Before leaving, Brett handed Ethan a pair of signed fight gloves from Vegas. The teenager stared at them like they were gold. "You keeping the belt at your house?" Ethan asked. "No." "Why?" Brett shrugged slightly. "Belts make people weird." Ethan laughed without fully understanding. That was probably good. Driving back toward Cleveland that evening, Brett realized something slowly. The trust had never really been about money. It had been about direction, keeping resources away from destruction, towards something useful instead. His phone rang through the truck speakers. "Leon Baxter. You watching Channel 5? Leon asked immediately. "No, you should." Brett turned in sports radio instead. The anchor sounded energized. "New developments tonight in the Brett Ross divorce dispute as attorney. Derek Holloway faces growing scrutiny regarding consulting payments connected to pre-filing financial strategy." Brett changed lanes quietly on the highway. The anchor continued. "Sources close to the case suggest additional documentation may emerge during next month's proceedings." Leon spoke again over Bluetooth. "Whole city's talking about this now." Brett stared through snowy traffic ahead. "I never wanted public drama. Too late for that." True. By the time Brett arrived home in Westlake, reporters already waited outside the neighborhood entrance again. Camera lights reflected against falling snow, while journalists tried shouting questions through rolled-up windows. Brett drove past them without slowing. Inside the house, silence greeted him immediately. Vanessa sat alone in the living room without television or music playing, just darkness and the soft glow from a floor lamp near the couch. She looked exhausted now, not glamorous anymore, not composed. The public pressure had started wearing through the image carefully built over years. Brett removed his coat slowly. Vanessa spoke without looking up. "Derek's withdrawing." Brett stopped. "What?" She laughed bitterly under her breath. "Conflict concerns. Reputation management. Whatever phrase lawyers use when things become inconvenient." "Interesting. Very interesting." Brett sat across from her quietly. Vanessa finally looked at him. "You happy?" "No, really." "Yeah." She studied his face carefully, like she genuinely wanted to find satisfaction there. She didn't, because Brett wasn't enjoying this. That confused her more than anger ever had. Vanessa rubbed tired eyes. "You know what's crazy?" she whispered. "A month ago, everyone thought you were a failure." Brett said nothing. "Now they treat you like some wise hero because you stayed calm." Outside, snow blew hard against the windows. Finally, Brett answered quietly. "I stayed calm because I saw it coming." That sentence hit her harder than accusations would have. Vanessa looked down at her hands for several seconds, then asked softly, "When did you stop loving me?" Brett leaned back slowly. The question deserved honesty. "I don't think I stopped," he admitted. "I think I stopped recognizing you." Silence swallowed the room afterward. Heavy silence. Final silence. Vanessa's eyes watered briefly, though she blinked it away immediately. Not because she suddenly regretted everything, but because truth sounded different once all the strategy collapsed around it. Upstairs, the house creaked softly in winter wind. Two people sat across from each other in the same living room they once designed together years earlier. Only now there were no more performances left. No cameras, no social media smiles, no carefully timed plans. Just consequences. And somewhere deep down, Vanessa Ross was beginning to understand something terrifying. Brett Ross had never beaten her with money. He beat her by staying patient longer than she stayed honest. Derek Holloway officially withdrew from the case the following Monday at 8:12 a.m. The filing reached local legal reporters within the hour. By noon, sports media picked it up too. High profile. Attorney exits Ross divorce case. Questions remain about consulting payments. The articles avoided direct accusations again. Professional people preferred careful language when liability existed. Still, everyone understood what withdrawal meant. Derek Holloway no longer believed the situation could protect his reputation. Vanessa Ross sat alone in a private mediation office 3 days later, wearing a gray wool coat and no jewelry except her wedding ring. Even that looked accidental now. The office belonged to a neutral arbitration firm near Public Square, downtown. Soft lighting, quiet hallways, expensive coffee machines trying too hard to calm angry people. Brett arrived exactly on time, carrying nothing except a black folder Caroline Pierce had prepared for him. No reporters waited outside this time. The media cycle had already moved on to newer scandals. That was another thing Brett understood now. Public attention disappeared faster than pain did. Inside the mediation room, a long wooden table divided both sides neatly. Vanessa sat at one end, Brett at the other, two attorneys in between. Not husband and wife anymore, just opposing structures. The mediator, a silver-haired former judge named Robert Hensley, adjusted his glasses while reviewing paperwork. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I'd like to remind everyone the purpose here is resolution, not punishment." Caroline nodded once. Vanessa looked exhausted. Brett remained unreadable. Hensley continued, "Mrs. Ross has agreed to withdraw any further challenge against the irrevocable trust structure. That happened faster than Brett expected." Vanessa avoided eye contact entirely. Caroline slid a document across the table. In exchange, she explained professionally, Mr. Ross agrees not to pursue additional public claims regarding reputational damages connected to prior media allegations. Brett glanced briefly at the paperwork. Clean separation. No revenge clauses, no humiliation strategy. Just endings that mattered to him. Vanessa finally spoke quietly. So you really don't want anything from me? Brett looked at her calmly. I want this finished. Something about that answer hurt her more than anger would have. Maybe because anger still implied emotional investment. Indifference felt colder. The mediator reviewed additional asset divisions carefully. The Westlake house would be sold. Retirement accounts split legally. Joint savings adjusted after reimbursement calculations involving the Holloway transfers. Vanessa would repay a portion of the $48,000 withdrawn improperly before filing. Not all. Enough. Caroline had explained earlier that total destruction rarely helped anyone in family court. Judges respected proportionality. So did Brett. An hour into mediation, Vanessa finally looked directly at him for the first time all morning. You could have buried me publicly, she said quietly. Brett said nothing. It wouldn't have been hard. Still silence. Vanessa laughed faintly under her breath. That's the part I still don't understand. The mediator excused himself briefly afterward to prepare updated drafts. Once the room emptied slightly, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, staring toward the frosted windows overlooking downtown Cleveland. Snow drifted softly between buildings outside. You know what Derek said after Vegas? She asked suddenly. Brett waited. He said, quiet men are dangerous because nobody notices when they stop caring. Brett folded his hands together slowly. He was wrong. Vanessa looked at him. About what I cared the whole time. That landed heavily, because it was true. Brett had not built the trust to hurt her. He built it because he finally accepted she was already leaving emotionally. There was a difference. Vanessa rubbed her forehead tiredly. I didn't plan for things to become this ugly. No one does. That's not true, she said softly. I did plan parts of it. Honesty again. Late honesty. The kind people offered after leverage disappeared. Brett appreciated it more than excuses, at least. Vanessa continued quietly. I was angry for years. At me, at my life. Brett watched her carefully now. No cameras, no courtroom, no audience. For the first time in months, she sounded less strategic and more human. I kept waiting for things to change, she admitted. Waiting for you to become who people said you could become. Brett looked down briefly at the mediation table. And when I didn't, you stayed in that gym. Her voice cracked slightly. You stayed small. That word again. Small. Brett understood something then. Vanessa never truly hated South Harbor Fight Club. She hated what it represented. Limits, ordinary life, uncertainty. Meanwhile, she spent years building herself toward wealthier rooms, richer clients, larger possibilities. Eventually, Brett stopped fitting the future she imagined. The problem was, she waited until success finally arrived before leaving. Timing exposed motives. Vanessa stared toward the snow outside. I didn't think you'd win, she whispered. Brett almost smiled faintly. Neither did Vegas. A tiny laugh escaped her unexpectedly. The first genuine sound between them in months. Then silence returned. Long silence. Finally, Vanessa asked the question that had probably been sitting underneath everything since the locker room in Las Vegas. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? Brett answered honestly. Because I needed to know what he looked directly at her. Whether you were waiting for me or waiting for the money. Vanessa's eyes lowered immediately. That was answer enough. The mediator returned shortly afterward, carrying revised settlement drafts. Everyone signed carefully, page after page. 12 years of marriage reduced into organized legal language and signatures. No screaming, no dramatic collapse, just paperwork. That somehow felt sadder. When the final document was completed, Caroline gathered her folders quietly, while the mediator shook hands professionally with everyone. Best of luck moving forward, he said. Nobody answered. Outside the mediation office downtown, Cleveland looked gray beneath heavy afternoon snow. Vanessa stood near the elevators while Brett waited several feet away, beside the hallway windows. Neither moved for a while. Finally, Vanessa spoke again without turning toward him. Do you hate me? Brett considered the question seriously. No, you should. Maybe. She nodded faintly. Another long silence followed. Then Vanessa finally turned toward him fully. Without the courtroom posture, without the polished real estate smile, without performance, just tired. You know what the worst part is? She asked quietly. Brett waited. You were probably the only person in my life who actually loved me before you became useful. The elevator doors opened softly beside them. Brett looked at her for several seconds. There were 100 cruel things he could have said then. About Derek, about timing, about greed, about betrayal. Instead, he simply answered, I think you stopped believing that mattered. Vanessa's eyes watered instantly this time. No hiding it, no controlling it. Just one honest, emotional reaction arriving months too late. Brett stepped into the elevator slowly, his knee aching again from old injuries and cold weather. Before the doors closed, Vanessa asked one final question. What happens now? Brett looked at her quietly. I go back to the gym. Then the elevator doors slid shut between them. No dramatic ending, no revenge speech, just distance, finally becoming official. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Brett stared at his reflection in the brushed steel walls. Bruised knuckles, scar above the eyebrow, gray beginning in his beard, the face of a man Cleveland once forgot. Somewhere above him, Vanessa Ross still stood alone in the hallway watching elevator numbers disappear downward. And for the first time since this entire story began, Brett realized something unexpected. Winning the championship had changed his finances. But surviving the divorce without becoming cruel had changed something far more important. It proved he was still the man he thought he was. Spring arrived slowly in Cleveland. Dirty snow melted into gray slush first. Then rain washed the streets clean. Then almost overnight, small patches of green appeared along sidewalks and vacant lots across the east side. South Harbor Fight Club changed too. Not dramatically. Brett Ross refused dramatic things now. But quietly, piece by piece, the gym started breathing differently. New heavy bags replaced the cracked ones, patched with duct tape for years. Fresh mats covered the warped flooring near the back wall. The leaking section of ceiling above the ring finally got repaired after the first insurance payment from the Vegas fight cleared through the trust-approved operating allocation. Leon Baxter stared at the renovations one morning while sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup. "This place looks respectable," now he muttered. Brett tightened hand wraps near the ring. "Still smells the same." "Yeah," Leon grunted. "That's the important part." The gym remained full of the same people. Construction workers before sunrise, teenagers after school, former addicts trying to stay disciplined one more week, single mothers dropping kids off because South Harbor felt safer than the streets outside. Money improved the building, not the mission. That mattered to Brett. A local newspaper ran a feature in April titled "Champion Invests in Cleveland Youth Boxing Program." Photographs showed Brett standing beside a group of kids holding borrowed gloves while sunlight streamed through old front windows. He hated the article, mostly because people suddenly treated ordinary decency like heroic behavior once money entered the story. Still, the publicity helped. Donations arrived. Community programs partnered with the gym. A local contractor volunteered to renovate the locker rooms at half cost after seeing Brett's interview on Channel 5 News. Even more surprising, college scouts began visiting because several teenagers training under Brett had become legitimate amateur prospects. One afternoon, Brett stood near the ring, watching 14-year-old Marcus Reed work combinations on focus mitts. Fast kid, natural timing. Marcus snapped a clean three-punch sequence before grinning proudly. "You see that, coach? Your left hook still drops too low," Brett answered calmly. Marcus sighed dramatically. "You never let people enjoy things." Brett almost smiled. Defense first. Across the gym, Ethan Cole sat at the front desk finishing scholarship paperwork for Ohio State University. The kid had grown taller recently, more confident. 2. Stable environments change teenagers fast. Ethan looked up from the paperwork. "You seriously putting the championship belt in the gym?" "Yeah, that thing's worth, like, crazy money." Brett shrugged. "It belongs here." Ethan shook his head, laughing softly. "Normal people buy Lamborghinis after becoming famous. Normal people don't teach your footwork either." "Fair point." The championship belt eventually got mounted inside a glass case near the front entrance beside faded amateur photos from decades earlier. No spotlight, no dramatic display, just part of the gym now. Kids touched the glass constantly anyway. Meanwhile, Vanessa Ross slowly disappeared from Cleveland's social circles. Not completely. People like Vanessa rarely vanished entirely. But invitations stopped arriving as often. Luxury listings moved to younger agents at North Point Realty. Photos disappeared from her social media page one by one until only neutral business content remained. The city moved on quietly. That was another truth Brett understood now. Scandals felt permanent while happening. Then people found newer distractions. One rainy Thursday evening in May, Brett locked the gym office and stepped outside into cool air, smelling faintly of wet concrete and gasoline. His old Ford still sat parked beside the curb. Same rust round the wheel wells. Same cracked dashboard. Same engine that occasionally struggled during cold mornings. He never replaced it. The truck reminded him of who he had been before cameras and headlines complicated everything. A voice called from behind him. "Coach!" Brett turned. Marcus Reed stood in the doorway, holding gloves over one shoulder. "You ever regret it? Regret what the fight? Vegas. All that." Brett looked back toward the darkening street for a moment. Traffic lights reflected against wet pavement nearby. "No," he answered honestly. Marcus hesitated. "Even with everything that happened, after interesting question." Brett leaned against the truck, slowly. Winning just sped things up. The teenager frowned slightly. "I don't get it." Brett looked toward the gym windows glowing softly behind them. "Some things were already breaking," he explained quietly. "The fight just forced the truth out faster." Marcus thought about that seriously. Kids understood more than adults realized sometimes. "You think you'd still be married?" "If you lost," Brett answered immediately. "No." That certainty surprised even him slightly. Because it was true. Vegas hadn't destroyed the marriage. The marriage had already been collapsing long before the cage lights turned on. Winning only exposed timing. Marcus nodded slowly, then asked another question. "You miss her?" Brett stayed silent longer this time. Rain tapped softly against the truck hood. Finally he answered carefully. "I miss who I thought she was." The teenager absorbed that quietly, then glanced through the gym windows toward the championship belt mounted near the entrance. "So was winning worth it?" Brett followed his gaze. The belt reflected softly beneath fluorescent lights while young fighters trained behind it. Punches hitting heavy bags, jump ropes slapping mats, ordinary sounds, real sounds. He thought about Vegas, the crowd screaming, the knockout, the divorce papers, the courtroom, the silence afterward. Then he thought about Ethan filling out college forms inside the office, about kids training safely instead of wandering streets at night, about waking up each morning without pretending his marriage still worked. Finally, Brett answered. "Yeah." Marcus grinned slightly. "Knew you'd say that." The teenager headed back inside the gym. Brett remained outside another few minutes watching rain fall across Cleveland streets. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Caroline Pierce. "Settlement finalized. Official as of today." No celebration followed the message. No emotional release, just completion. Brett typed back only 2 words. "Thanks, Caroline." Then he slid the phone away. Inside the gym, Leon shouted at someone for dropping their right hand during sparring. A teenager laughed loudly afterward. Life continuing. That mattered. Brett unlocked the truck door slowly, his knee aching slightly from years of damage that would never fully disappear. Before climbing inside, he looked back one more time toward South Harbor Fight Club. The building still wasn't impressive, still old, still rough around the edges. But now the front windows glowed warm against the rainy Cleveland evening, while kids trained safely inside under lights he almost couldn't afford years earlier. And suddenly, Brett understood something clearly. Vanessa had spent years trying to escape ordinary life. Brett had spent years trying to protect meaningful life. Those were not the same thing. The rain grew heavier as he climbed into the truck. A championship belt rested inside a gym instead of a mansion. A trust fund waited for a teenager instead of luxury vacations. And Brett Ross drove home through wet Cleveland streets, realizing he no longer needed the world to misunderstand him correctly. He finally understood himself. 1 year after the championship fight in Las Vegas, Brett Ross woke up every morning at 4:45 a.m. without an alarm. Some habits stayed welded into a man permanently. Cleveland remained dark at that hour. Streetlights reflected against wet pavement, while cold wind rolled off Lake Erie through nearly empty roads. Brett drove the same old Ford F-150 through the city toward South Harbor Fight Club, with black coffee balanced beside him, and local sports radio talking quietly through worn speakers. The announcers barely mentioned his name anymore. That was fine. Fame exhausted him faster than training ever had. When he unlocked the gym each morning, the building greeted him with familiar smells. Rubber mats, dust, leather, bleach, home. The renovations from the previous year had helped, but South Harbor still felt honest. Nothing inside pretended to be luxury. Kids from the neighborhood still arrived before school to train. Construction workers still hit heavy bags before shifts. Old fighters still wandered in carrying stories about damaged knees and broken marriages. Some things never changed. And Brett had learned that stability mattered more than excitement. At 5:10 a.m., Leon Baxter walked through the front doors, carrying 2 coffees and complaining about the weather. "You know," Leon muttered, "normal rich people sleep later." Brett wrapped his hands near the ring. "Normal rich people don't know how to jab." Leon sorted. "Fair enough." The gym filled steadily as dawn approached. Music played softly from old speakers overhead. Gloves cracked against pads rhythmically, while jump ropes slapped the floor in steady patterns. Real work, not performance. That difference mattered deeply now. Ethan Cole arrived around 6:30, wearing an Ohio State hoodie and carrying a backpack stuffed with orientation paperwork. He officially moved into campus housing in 2 weeks. The kid looked nervous, trying not to look nervous. "You got all your documents?" Brett asked. "Yeah." "Financial aid forms?" "Yeah." "Student housing confirmation?" Ethan sighed dramatically. "You ask more questions than airport security." Brett almost smiled. "That's because I know you." Ethan leaned against the ring ropes, watching younger fighters train. "You ever think about leaving Cleveland now?" he asked. Suddenly, Molly. Brett frowned slightly. "For what? I don't know." "Bigger gym, better weather, TV deals." Those offers had come. Las Vegas gyms, Florida training centers, even commentary work from combat sports networks. Big money, big exposure. Brett turned all of it down quietly. This place mattered. Before money showed up, he answered. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood now. Maybe he did. At 8 a.m., a local reporter stopped by the gym asking for another interview about Brett's inspirational comeback story. Brett declined politely again. That confused reporters every time. People still wanted him to become a motivational symbol, a brand, a personality. But Brett understood something most cameras never captured. The real victory had happened after Vegas. Not inside the cage, inside the choices afterward. No revenge tour, no public humiliation, no bitterness poisoning everything. Just boundaries, discipline, forward movement. Around noon, Brett sat alone inside the office, reviewing monthly gym expenses, while rain tapped softly against the windows. A framed photo rested beside the paperwork now. Ethan standing beside his Ohio State acceptance letter. Brett looked at it briefly before returning to numbers. The office door opened quietly. Vanessa stepped inside. He hadn't seen her in almost 5 months, not since the final property documents cleared. She looked different now, simpler, less polished somehow. No designer coat, no expensive jewelry, just jeans, boots, and a dark sweater, damp from rain outside. Brett leaned back slowly in the chair. Hey. The silence between them felt strange now. Not hostile, not intimate, just distant. Vanessa looked around the office carefully. New paint, updated equipment lists, youth program schedules pinned to the wall. The gym had become larger than either of them expected. You really stayed, she said quietly. Brett frowned slightly. You sound surprised. I guess I thought success would change you. It did. Vanessa looked at him then. How Brett considered the question honestly. I stopped needing people to understand me. That answer stayed between them quietly. Rain continued falling outside, while heavy bags thudded rhythmically in the main gym area. Vanessa walked slowly toward the office window, overlooking the training floor. Kids moved through drills beneath fluorescent lights, while Leon shouted corrections from the ring. It's loud in here, she murmured. Usually. Another silence. Then Vanessa finally said the things she probably came to say. I'm leaving Cleveland. Brett nodded once. Where's Charlotte? Real estate. Yeah, she folded her arms loosely. There's more work there. Maybe. Or maybe fewer memories. Brett didn't ask. Vanessa looked toward the championship belt displayed near the front entrance. You know, I hated that thing for a while. The belt. What it represented. Brett understood. Success arriving too late. Truth arriving even later. Vanessa turned toward him fully. I owe you an apology. Brett stayed quiet. I kept telling myself I was angry because you never became successful. She swallowed once. But really, I think I was angry because you stayed yourself. That interested him. Vanessa continued softly. You didn't become cynical, or fake, or obsessed with money. A faint smile touched her face, sadly. And I think part of me resented that because I did. No defense, no manipulation, just honesty, finally arriving after everything else burned away. Brett looked down at the financial paperwork on his desk, then back at her. We both changed. Yeah, Vanessa whispered. But only one of us liked who they became. The gym noises outside filled the silence afterward. Young fighters laughing, jump ropes moving, life continuing. Finally, Vanessa reached into her coat pocket and placed something on Brett's desk. A small brass house key. Westlake House. The final copy. The realtor closes next week, she said. Brett nodded. Then Vanessa hesitated near the doorway. You know what the strange part is? What you were happiest before any of the money? Brett thought about that carefully. Cold mornings opening the gym, training kids, driving the old truck through Cleveland's snow. Simple routines, purpose. Maybe she was right. Take care of yourself, Brett, Vanessa said quietly. You too. Then she left. No dramatic ending. No final embrace. Just footsteps, fading through the gym, toward the rainy street outside. Brett remained seated for a long moment, afterward staring at the brass key on his desk. Then Leon poked his head into the office. That your ex-wife? Yeah. Leon grunted. She looked sad. Brett looked toward the rain-covered windows. Probably. You okay? Brett listened to the sounds outside the office again. Gloves hitting bags, kids training, life moving. Yeah, he answered honestly. That evening, after the final class ended, Brett locked South Harbor Fight Club alone. Rain had finally stopped. The city smelled clean. Streetlights reflected against wet pavement, while distant traffic hummed softly through Cleveland neighborhoods. The championship belt still sat inside its glass case near the entrance. Not hidden, not worshipped, just present. Brett turned off the lights one by one, until only the front hallway remained glowing softly behind him. Outside, his old Ford F-15 waited beside the curb, exactly where it always had. Same truck. Same city, different man. Before climbing inside, Brett looked back through the gym windows one last time. A year ago, the world thought he was a failed fighter surviving on borrowed time. Then people thought he became important because he won money. But standing there, beneath the quiet Cleveland night, Brett finally understood the truth clearly. The championship was never the victory. Keeping his character, after everything fell apart, was. Life has a strange way of revealing people when money, pressure, and opportunity arrive at the same time. Some people become louder. Some become colder. And some simply become more honest about who they already were. Brett Ross never won because he was richer, smarter, or more ruthless than everyone around him. He won because he stayed patient long enough to see the truth clearly before reacting emotionally. A lot of people watching this story probably know what it feels like to be underestimated. Maybe you stayed quiet while others judged your job, your income, your future, or your worth. Maybe someone only valued you when success finally arrived. And maybe the hardest lesson is realizing that betrayal usually starts long before the moment it becomes visible. So, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed calm while someone underestimated you and later realized you saw the truth before they did? If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a man who was thrown out of his own company meeting before the board discovered he still owned the building.